So you want to visit Orkney, but you think you have to wait until the summer. Well, I'm here with this video to try and prove you wrong, and here are some of the highlights of what you're going to see. Morning everybody, it's early doors here in Edinburgh. It's about 6 AM and we're getting ready to drive up to Orkney. So we've got about 6 hours ahead of driving, an hour or so on the ferry. It's my first time to Orkney, not 100% sure what to expect apart from some ancient settlements, stone circles, Vikings, things like that. Hopefully some great food. I hope you enjoy coming along for a ride. It's a long old way to Orkney from Edinburgh. 273 miles in fact, a little over 5 hours through the Cairngorms, past Inverness and onto the coastal road through Sutherland and Caithness. Then we reach the far north coast and the Pentland Ferry. It's a bit noisy out here, so hopefully you can hear me. But that, in the background there, we have left the Scottish mainland behind. And over there, you can see the cliffs of Hoy, where I'll be going tomorrow. So I've made it as far as the Pentland Ferry, so I've got an hour now as we cross the Pentland Firth. Plenty of time to tell you a story, which I was going to do up on deck, but there's so many car alarms going off that I found a quiet corner downstairs instead. This story goes back a long time. There was a king, Danish king called Frodi, and he owned a magical set of millstones known as a grotty. And if you could get them to work, they would grind out anything that your heart desired, but unfortunately they were so big, so heavy that no mortal could move them. So Frodi was out of luck until he found two enslaved giantesses called Fenja and Menja, who he bought off the Queen of Sweden. He brought them back and he got them to grind out his mill, and his first wish was to grind out peace and prosperity. So a very noble cause, but soon Frodi greed got the better of him, and he asked his enslaved giantesses to grind him out gold, and grind out gold they did. He became a very wealthy man, just as Fenja and Menja became very tired giantesses. Eventually they asked for pause, they asked for a break, and Frodi said no. So while he slept that night, these angry giantesses, they decided to sing a song. There was a song about how evil Frodi was, and how they wouldn't grind gold for him any longer. And as they sang and as they ground away, instead they started to grind out an army led by a sea king called Mycing. The Mycing and his army, they killed Frodi in his sleep, and they overthrew his kingdom, but that wasn't freedom for the giantesses, no. Instead, Mycing decided to steal the mill for himself along with them, and he wanted to take it as far away from Denmark as possible. So he sailed with the grindstones and the two giantesses towards Scotland. Just as he got to the little bit between Orkney and Caithness, he asked Fenja and Menja to grind him out salt. It's the only thing as valuable as gold. And he ground and he ground, and the salt filled up the cargo holds, and as it went it got heavier and heavier, but Mycing didn't stop. When he got right here, this pretty much this very spot, the boat sank. It sank right to the bottom of the Pentland Firth, with Fenja, Menja and the grotty, the grindstone, right down to the bottom of the sea. There, they're trapped. They're still grinding away. That's why the sea is still full of salt. And also it's why every so often a whirlpool forms in the Pentland Firth, known as the Swelkie, just to remind us that Fenja and Menja are still there, still working, forever. Well, here we go. Welcome to Orkney. I was heading straight for Kirkwall to kick off, and my first glimpse of the incredible St Magnus Cathedral and the Earl's Palace across the street. The weather wasn't quite playing ball though. Well, the plan would be to wander around Kirkwall a bit, but it is mad. So, check in, go to the pub. Good plan. The next morning, it was another early start, as we headed off the Orkney mainland in the pitch black to one of the archipelago's smaller islands. This is Hoy. Now the first proper stop of the day was the Dwarfy Stain. Bring appropriate footwear. It's boggy. If you're feeling nimble, then go ahead and climb right on in. Although you might not want to once I've told you this is a Neolithic tomb, carved from a single enormous chunk of rock. You'll find 2 chambers have been carefully chiselled out, using either stone or antler tools. You'll also find graffiti from past visitors, some of it hundreds of years old, but please don't be tempted to add your own. That big lump sitting outside the entrance once plugged it closed, so somebody at some time has knocked a hole in the roof instead. Now, after gracefully clambering out, I think it's time for another story, don't you?
Now, this is the story of the Dwarfisteen. A long time ago, there was a dwarf and his lovely wife living on Hoy. And one day his wife got pregnant. And the dwarf thought, I can't have you sleeping outside in your kind of condition. I'm going to make you a nice, comfortable home. So he found a big stone. And he got his hammer and his chisel and he carved them a little home inside. He cut a big entrance, he cut 2 beds out of stone, a couple of stone pillows, a nice big curved space where his wife's belly could grow into. It was perfect. They were comfortable, they were happy. But somebody else wasn't happy. And that was a giant who lived in the hills of Hoy, and he hated that dwarf, and he hated him even more now he had a nice warm, comfortable bed for the night, while he had to sleep out in the hills amongst the heather and the rain. So he came up with a plan. He waited one night till the dwarf and his wife went to bed, and then he stood up on Ward Hill and he picked up a stone that looked like it would fit right into this little gap, and he put it in his sling and he twirled it and he launched it, and this stone right here plugged that gap perfectly. Well, all he had to do now was sit and wait. Eventually the dwarf and his wife, well, they would starve and he could come down, he could unplug the hole and he'd have it all to himself, although I'm not entirely sure how he would fit if he was a giant. Well, the dwarf heard the commotion and he saw somebody had plugged up his entrance. So he got his hammer and his chisel and poof, he smashed a hole right through the top of the stone. He popped his head up and he looked around, and there he saw him, his rival the giant, standing up there laughing on his hill, and he was furious. His blood boiled. So up he popped out the top and he ran straight after him. He chased him and he chased him, and legend says he's still chasing him today.
There's more to see on this island than just the Dwarfisteen, though. For this one, we're heading to the beautiful Quake Bay before climbing high on Hoy to see an old man.
I knew this was going to happen. 30 seconds later, the rain's off. But just look at this.
Now, this isn't really too hard a hike. It's a bit of a climb to start with, but then it levels out and the views are just incredible. Until eventually you see him in the distance. The old man of Hoy. If you want to get the best view though, we're going to have to take to the sky. The 137 metre high Old Man was officially climbed for the first time in 1966, but it's also said that a local climbed the sea stack years before this for a bet. Then he had to do it a second time because he'd left his favourite pipe at the top. Now, I'm no climber, so I will just appreciate the view from the relative safety of the cliffs. If the sun didn't set so early in Orkney in January, I think I'd be here for hours. But instead, it's time to head back to the ferry.
I can't think of a better place. Sit and have some sandwiches.
Once on the Orkney mainland again, a quick visit to the round church at Ophir. Viking sagas tell us that an Earl of Orkney died in his drinking hall here at Yule by putting on a poisoned shirt meant for his brother and made by his mum. I had a feeling it was going to be a good sunset, so time to visit Scapa Flow, the main base for the Royal Navy during both World Wars. hard to believe that on a peaceful day like this. Those sandwiches were long gone, but luckily I'd pre-ordered a burger from the Orkney street food trailer. I'm not a food blogger, but this is pretty good. I think I'm going to sleep well tonight. The next day felt a wee bit more like winter in Orkney, but then I didn't come here to sunbathe anyway.
There's an old saying, there's no such thing as bad weather, just the wrong clothes. I am putting that to the test today.
It was a bit of a damp hike, on my way to the Covenanters Memorial on the coast at Deerness. Built in 1888, its story goes back 200 more years to the aftermath of the Battle of Bothwell Bridge. Presbyterian Covenanters were being transported to the colonies as indentured servants as a punishment for standing against King Charles's religious reforms. On the way they had to sail around Orkney. On the 10th of December 1679, a day probably just like this, a storm blew the ship against the rocks. The Covenanters were locked below deck, and since they were insured as cargo, the captain wasn't going to risk his life setting them free. Instead, one crew member is said to have defied orders and broken the hatch with an axe, allowing some of the prisoners to escape. Even then, 200 men drowned, and this enormous column is a fitting memorial. Admittedly, it probably wasn't the best time to be wandering the coast. It was pretty terrible weather, unless you're a wind turbine. So I was more than happy to get back to the car and stick the heated seats on. Time to head somewhere indoors, I think. Somewhere pretty special. This is the Italian Chapel, constructed during World War II by Italian prisoners of war. They were here to build the Churchill barriers, used as causeways for cars now, but their real purpose was to block access to Scapa Flow between Orkney's smaller islands, after a U-boat managed to sink the HMS Royal Oak in 1939. This work of art was created out of 2 Nissen Huts, a load of spare concrete and any bits of scrap the Italians could find. The main artist was Domenico Cicchetti, with help from many others. The walls are painted to look like 3D columns or fancy tiles. Then a Madonna and Child was copied from a prayer card Domenico's mum gave him. It's just incredible, even 80 years later on. So good, it was almost worth me slipping over on the grass outside for. After changing my shorts, it was time for a slightly bigger church, St Magnus Cathedral. Top tip here, book a guided tour to see the upper levels of this historic building. Just be aware that there are a fair few steps and more than a few tight passageways. There are amazing carved stones, moved in here for protection, and we were even treated to some organ music by curator Fran. Onwards and upwards, you might need a head for heights to fully enjoy this tour. Into the belfry with its constant, slightly ominous ticking, you might want to turn the volume down for this next part. We still weren't at the top yet though. It was just a wee bit further to the roof. Even on a miserable day, just check out that view of Kirkwall. As we head back to ground level, let me tell you a story. This church was originally founded by Earl Rognvald and is dedicated to his uncle St Magnus, which means people like to call it a Viking cathedral. Magnus had been martyred by his cousin, who ordered his cook to smash his head in with an axe. After the Reformation, the saint's bones went missing, considered lost like so many other holy relics. Then during building work in 1919, a box full of bones was found buried in a pillar, including the skull of somebody who just happened to have taken an axe to the head. So Magnus' bones were put back in this pillar, marked by a wee cross. Enjoy some of the incredible gravestones of prominent Orcadians, now kept safely inside the cathedral. Then it's time for a nightcap before bed.
Last day on Orkney, and just about to leave, and it starts snowing. Times like this,
I really don't want to get out of the car, but in my experience, I would regret not doing it more than I ever regret getting out into the wind and rain. So, let's go.
Would you look at that? As soon as you step out the car, the rain's off. We go to the Standing Stones of Stens. The Standing Stones of Stens are around 5,400 years old, and it's thought that this was the very first stone circle anywhere in Britain. From this very spot, a culture that still mystifies us today spread around the British Isles. A culture with Orkney at its very core. There were once a dozen stones in the circle, plus another outlier with a hole in the middle known as the Odin Stone. But in 1814, a Captain Mackay who had bought the farm here began destroying the stones of Stens to stop people walking across his land. Luckily, he was stopped before he could go too far. This is the heart of Neolithic Orkney. The stones of Stens back there. We've got the Loch of Harry here. Across this strip of land, we've got the Loch of Stens, all guarded by this big standing stone. Up there, the Ness of Broadgun, the Ring of Broadgun. It's all connected. It's a very short drive across a small strip that feels like another of the Churchill barriers to the Ring of Broadgun on the other side of this ceremonial landscape. The unreliable weather continues. We're back to snow, but it's light snow. Anyway, we're just approaching along this walkway. The Ring of Broadgun over there. A fascinating stone circle and home to an equally fascinating story. The size of this stone circle is so difficult to fully show you the scale. Originally made up of 60 stones, only 36 are left to form the Ring of Broadgun. This is the third largest stone circle in Britain. At 104 metres in diameter, and unlike most, it's almost a perfect circle. A long time ago, Orkney was a land of giants. These were fearsome, warlike creatures, but they loved to dance. The only thing is they had to do it by the light of the moon, because the glare of the sun turned them to stone. Well, one night they gathered here between the lochs of Harry and Stens. One of the giants had brought a fiddle, and he began to play a tune. As he played, the giants all linked hands, and they spun round and round and round in circles, dancing their cares away. Well, eventually, the music suddenly stopped. Nobody had been keeping track of time. The giants all turned to see that the fiddle player had turned to stone. Dawn was breaking, and then suddenly, every giant was stuck in his place as he slowly turned to stone, right where they still stand today. This is known as the Comet Stone, but this was the fiddler who was sitting down playing a tune as all of the giants danced up there, the Ring of Broadgun. This is not a standing stone. It's a fence post. Our next stop in a tour of Neolithic Orkney is probably the most popular of them all. We're heading to the 5,000-year-old village of Skara Brae. Now, if you visit Orkney in the summer months, there's a good chance you'll find huge buses here, and Skara Brae packed with visitors from the cruise ships. But here I am in January, and I've got the whole place to myself. First, it's worth checking the museum out to get an idea of life in Neolithic Orkney before exploring the village itself. I consider myself incredibly lucky. Since I was the only person here, I actually got to walk inside the walls, through these stone corridors. This place was once home to around 100 people, in up to 8 buildings, all constructed from dry stone walls with amazing stone dressers, box beds, and even a primitive underground sewage system. After around 600 years of occupation, Skara Brae was abandoned and completely covered in sand, lying hidden below the ground until 1850, when a great storm uncovered evidence of the village. Now fully excavated, it's one of the most incredible archaeological features anywhere in the world. With all this wintry weather, it's time to fuel up,
Julia's shed in Stromness with a crab roll and some warming soup. Neolithic Orkney wasn't quite done with us yet, though, even if local traffic did hold us up a wee bit. We've seen where early Orcarians lived, the standing stones where they probably worshipped, so now it's time to find out where they went when they died. There are burial cairns all over Orkney, and some are open for anybody to explore any time, like the 5,000-year-old Unston Cairn. If you don't like tight spaces, this maybe isn't the one for you. Inside, you'll find different stalls, and we believe this was a communal burial place. Human bones were found in 5 piles, along with 2 full skeletons. It's possible that once bodies had decayed, their bones were moved into a stall with their ancestors. We'll probably never know for sure, though. Anybody else feeling uncomfortable? Time to get back into the fresh, chilly air. My final stop was Orkney's largest and most famous burial cairn, Maze How. This is one you can only visit with a Historic Scotland guide, and you actually park up at the visitor centre and then get a wee minibus there, which takes a few minutes. Unfortunately, there's no filming allowed inside Maze How, so you'll need to visit yourself to really get the experience, but it's enormous inside, mind-boggling. Around the winter solstice when I visited, the sun shines down a central passageway and lights up the interior. Unfortunately, there was no sun that day at all. Back in the minibus and back to base. Things were getting really snowy now, but it was time to say goodbye to Orkney anyway. Back on the ferry, grab a bite for dinner, and please don't judge my diet, it's been a long, long day. I really hope you enjoyed seeing what you can do in a few days in Orkney in winter. If you want to see more wee tours like this and hear some of Scotland's amazing stories, then like this video, click the subscribe button, and you can even turn notifications on for new videos. I'd hugely appreciate it if you share this with your friends too. So until the next time, Sláinte.